Hey y'all, today we are going to talk about another way to collect data, and that would be through random sampling. So let's first talk about who we are collecting data about. The population that we want to know something about, that is the group of all possible people who we want to know something about. So let's use an example of our school and the student body. Every student that is enrolled in school here would be considered a member of our population if we are trying to find something out about the students at Unity Reed High School. The things that we're trying to find out, let's say maybe average attendance or grade point average, or we could even do height. That is what we would call a parameter. If we're trying to find something out about a population, we are trying to find a parameter. Usually it's very difficult to find out something from an entire population because populations typically are very large. It's very difficult to reach out to every individual in a population. And so therefore we take samples, which are smaller, but it is important to note that these samples need to be representative of our population. What we are finding out about a sample is called a statistic. So it is still the thing we want to know about the population, but if we find it from a sample, it's called a statistic. So typically we are calculating statistics, averages, proportions, standard deviations, things like that are typically statistics because we usually collect them from samples. We will use that statistic or those statistics, the things we're trying to find out about from our sample, to try and make inferences later about our population. They're inferences because we typically can't draw conclusions. All we can do is infer. So we've done simulations. That's one way to collect data. If it's maybe inconvenient or not cost effective or time effective to run an experiment, we can do a simulation. We'll talk more about experiments in the future. We can also collect data through surveys. Now, if we can survey an entire population, then we would be taking what you have probably heard of is a census. A census is a survey of the entire population. It is usually impossible to reach an entire population unless that is a small group. And so therefore we'll take a sample. And a sample survey is just a survey of a smaller and, again, representative group from our population. We always want to make sure that our sample well represents everybody in the population. So we want all characteristics that might influence results to be accounted for when we are taking a sample so that it best represents the entire group we're thinking of. So whenever we take a sample, we do a sample survey, we always want our sample to be random. We want to select people at random. We have done some random number generating when doing simulations, and that will help us here. And we also, like I have said a couple times now, want our sample to be representative of the entire population. We want to do as best we can to include all differences within our sample. So a quick note about how many people we should sample or how many things we should sample. This is not my example. This is from the textbook, but I really like it. If we are cooking a large pot of soup here, and we want to know if the soup has been salted well enough, we don't need to take a whole ladle of soup just because our container is very large. So if we have a really large population, that doesn't necessarily mean we need an enormous sample. If I want to know if my soup is salted well, I can stir the soup, which is randomizing, and then I can take a spoonful and taste it. A spoonful is enough. One taste is enough to know if I need to add a little bit of salt. The same thing is true if I have a bowl of soup. If I stir up my bowl of soup and I take one spoonful, that would tell me enough if my soup had been salted enough. So whether your population is very large or maybe not so large, the sample size doesn't have to be enormous. We need to sample enough, so you'd want a good spoonful, but you don't need a ladle of soup. So the first method we'll call a simple random sample, which we will refer to often as an SRS, just for convenience sake, time's sake. So let's consider that we want a random sample of students at Unity Read, because we know it's very difficult to get a hold of every student in this building. And we'll talk more about why that's true in the next lesson. But we want a simple random sample, so we can assign every student in this building a number. So we're going to assign a number to everyone in the population. We do that. Everybody has a student number. Then we can use some form of technology, perhaps a calculator like we have, to randomly generate numbers. So we can use the random integers function on our calculator. We might want to, or we would want to have in mind how many students we want to sample. So for ease of numbers, let's use 100. If we want to sample 100 students to survey them, let's say about the food in the cafeteria, that's a popular topic. Or maybe the length of lunch, that would be something as well we'd be interested in, whether or not people think the length of lunch is good enough. We would randomly generate 100 student numbers, and then we would find the students connected to those student numbers, and we would survey them in hopes that those 100 people represented our school population well enough. But let's say we wanted to make sure that we definitely get a sample of everybody who's a freshman, a sample of not everybody who's a freshman, a sample of freshmen. We want to make sure that we speak to some freshmen. We want to make sure we speak to some juniors and some sophomores and some seniors. We could take what we call a stratified sample. In this instance, we would break our entire population, our student body, into homogeneous groups. That means they have something in common. Each of the groups have a specific characteristic in common, and we would call those groups strata. In this case, our characteristic is the grade level. Maybe the seniors have a differing opinion from the freshmen, and we want to make sure those opinions are represented. So in each strata, we can assign everyone a number. So maybe we would number all of our freshmen 1, 2, however many there are. Same thing with our sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And then within each of those groups, we would do a random sample. So we would do a random sample of 25 students in each of the grade levels. And then we would survey those 25 freshmen, those 25 sophomores, 25 juniors, and 25 seniors. Now we have guaranteed we reach each grade level, because we think that their opinions on lunches might differ in some way. Another way of grouping would be to do clusters. In this case, we are going to break our population into heterogeneous groups. That means they are diverse. We are not breaking them up by one characteristic. Hopefully, most of the characteristics are represented in those clusters. Sometimes this is based out of practicality. So you know that we are not always in a freshman class, a sophomore class, a junior class. We often have students of different grade levels in any class, math, English. So we might consider first periods, or let's say this year an advisory class. Well, in advisory, we are grouped by grade level. So let's go to first periods. Let's consider all first periods a cluster. We would assign a number to every first period class. And then we would randomly generate, let's say 5 clusters. Maybe we have around 20, 21 students in each first period. We'll get around 100, probably more. So we'll randomly generate the number of 5 clusters, so 5 homerooms, and then we will survey everyone in those clusters. So the difference here between stratified and cluster is that stratified, we are breaking up by specific characteristics. Clusters, we're breaking our population up sort of by practical groupings. So we are getting a practical grouping by selecting first periods. We'll select 5 of those randomly, and then within those first periods, we'll go in and we will survey everybody in those classes. And then the last one we'll talk about is systematic. It's a bit like a simple random sample, except we are only randomly generating one number. So we assign everyone, let's say all the students get a student number. We will randomly generate one number. And then we will survey every nth. Okay, that's a value we need to pick. Maybe we want to survey every 5th or every 10th or every 100th student number after the one that we randomly generated. And then we keep going up by 10 or 100, whichever number we decided, and collect that student number until we get our 100 students surveyed. Before you try these, if you need clarification on any or all of the methods, please do ask before you try some on your own. But I would like you to pause the video here, read through these 4 scenarios, and decide which random sampling method is represented in each of these. Pause, try them on your own, and then when you press play, I will talk about the answers. So check your answers. In the first one, we know it's systematic because we are picking every 10th passenger. The second one is stratified because we have grouped the passengers by some homogeneous quality. So we have first class versus other. So the type of class you are in. The third one is a simple random sample because we're just randomly generating 30 seat numbers. So we have numbered the passengers by their seat number, and then we randomly generate 30. And the last one is a cluster because we take a practical grouping, like which seat row they're in, and then we will randomly select one of those seat positions and survey everybody in that seat position, hoping that that grouping of people will be representative of everybody on our flight. If you got one or more of these wrong and you can't understand why, please do ask for help before you go on to the practice. We have some practice attached to this lesson. A question box will pop up where you have to put your answer before you can move on to the next one. Please make sure you answer all the questions. If you're working through them and you need help, I'm always available and willing to help you. Just ask. Take your time on the practice, and good luck.